idea to us.
If you want to get this thing up the trigger.
Yeah. You're good.
Thank you.
Good whenever. What's it?
Do you want to like open the public hearing?
Yeah, I just want to as
Yeah, that's fine.
a commission.
All right, we'll call the public hearing meeting to order. MSA is going to be doing the presentation, so if you have any questions, you can direct them to them.
So Steve's gonna give a presentation and then have a period for public comment. We are recording the meeting, right, so that we can get everyone's information. And
Yep.
put those public hearing comments down for submittal with the report.
Yes.
Can we just ask you, if you do have questions, you're going to come up to the podium, state your name, address, and get that recorded. I'm Steve Sell from MSA Professional Services. We got offices across the state. I'm in the Madison office. I'm here presenting the wastewater facilities plan for the city of Mayville and the wastewater treatment plant operation. And we've been putting this together with the utility staff for probably the last year and a half. So it's a pretty thorough investigation of the facility and kind of looking at deficiencies and planned upgrades that would need to be recommended. So I'm gonna go over this handout that was on the front table, if you can grab this, if you want to grab one. And this slideshow over here will summarize most of the main points in that handout. So the first main topic is why a facilities plan, why not? Mayville wastewater treatment plant facility was constructed in the early 1930s, and at the original site, or the site it's at now. And there's been a number of upgrades that have occurred over the years, from the 50s, 60s, but the most recent major expansion was in the early 80s. So that puts most of the equipment and structures out there at over 40 years old, which leaves them at a high risk of failure and increased difficulty with O&M costs, operation and maintenance costs. A lot of the influent flows in the past 5 years have exceeded the peak plant capacity. So back when that facility was upgraded in early 1980s, the plant was sized projecting the growth of the city for population as well as industrial growth for about 20 years. So the flows that we're seeing now have increased and exceeded the plant's capacity. Not just due to growth, but also due to some failures in the collection system, which have led to what they call SSOs and TFOs, so sanitary sewer overflows and treatment facility overflows. So those are reportable to DNR, and the DNR can take action upon those if we have a number of events, and that would be required to improve the facility to prevent those from happening again. So there's also maintenance deficiencies. The facility does not provide sufficient workspace and storage for the utility department. They're scattered about a number of buildings that are quite old and in significant need of upgrade. And then future operational cost uncertainty with some of the equipment that they have, as well as chemical and biosolids hauling options that are out there. There's a lot of uncertainty in those costs in the future, and they are at risk of going up significantly. And there's not a lot of capacity in the treatment plant to allow them flexibility and different solids management options and chemical treatment options. And then lastly, there's a very favorable funding environment that's out there. The bipartisan infrastructure law has a lot of dollars out there for use amongst wastewater and other water treatment upgrades across the state. And it's a very favorable funding market for not only the city of Mayville, but also a lot of other municipalities in the state. So what alternatives or what deficiencies were identified? Well, first of all, you could ask why or what if we did nothing? What if we just didn't improve anything at the site? And that's actually an option we have to evaluate as part of the DNR requirements for facility planning. So one, that would lead to equipment failure and increased maintenance costs. Two, the plant would continue to deteriorate and then the building facility would no longer be able to function like they were designed to. There'd be lack of treatment, continued overflow, so it would be actionable by the DNR for non-compliance, and you get notice violations, and eventually the DNR or the state could take legal action upon the city, which would lead to fines, and then eventually a moratorium on any growth in the city itself. When we look at kind of some of the identified deficiencies, I'll go by process unit, so I'll kind of describe these, so people that aren't familiar with what they are can kind of get a handle of what we looked at. So as wastewater enters the wastewater treatment plant, it passes through what's called a fine screen that's going to remove a lot of the large solids and prevent them from entering into the other structures and pumps on the site. That screen that was installed in the 1980s is undersized for the peak flows that are projected and existing peak flows at the plant. So it needs to be replaced in order to process that entire flow. The raw wastewater pumping, so there's 4 pumps there in that photo on the bottom right. Those are pumping wastewater throughout the plant. They're undersized for the peak flow events that are also occurring both now and in the future. So they also need to be replaced or upsized. And then grit removal, which would occur after the screening process, that's going to remove a lot of the solids, like gravel, sand, that would enter into the treatment plant and cause detriment to other equipment downstream. Those need to be that system needs to be rehabilitated in order to be more efficient and provide better grit removal long term. The aeration basins, that's where a lot of the biological treatment happens. So we're adding air through blower systems. Those blowers are well beyond their service life. There are 4 blowers, only 3 are functional, and they are very inefficient in terms of delivering oxygen compared to today's standards, as well as they're just old and they're consuming a lot of electrical energy compared to newer efficient blowers. So we looked at a couple different options there in terms of upgrading the aeration system. A lot of the new technology is fine bubble aeration compared to some of the coarse bubble aeration that's in there now. So the bubbles are smaller, there's more oxygen transfer, it's a more efficient biological process. And then we also looked at fine bubble upgrade with enhanced biological nutrient removal. So that would be optimizing the different cells inside of the aeration tanks that we can get nutrient removal, which would help reduce some of the chemical costs that are used to treat for phosphorus removal in the plant. Secondary clarification, so these are clarifiers that are settling the solids that were created during the aerobic process. They do not meet code requirements. However, they do meet the treatment requirements issued by the DNR's permit. So we are able to actually treat with smaller than required by code clarifiers. So we looked at 2 different options. One was just modifying these so that there's a storm mode. We could bypass a little bit more water through the system and keep the same clarifiers. Or option 2, which would be a more extensive option, would be adding additional clarifiers to meet the code requirement if required by the DNR. Now, we've been successful at other treatment plants in submitting curves and showing the performance of the clarifiers and meeting the permit limits. So we anticipate that happening here as well. Beyond clarification, one of the last steps before you discharge the wastewater is disinfection. The city currently has a UV disinfection system that was installed in the mid-90s. That is in need of upgrades on the control system. So we have validated 2 options. One, we're looking at just upgrading the controls itself, and then 2 would be upgrading the whole UV system if the DNR would not accept our first proposal in this facility plan. And then one of the major concerns of the treatment plant is solids processing. So there's a number of different options here. Currently, the city does not have enough capacity for storing solids to do efficient decanting, which would be removing clear water off of it and increasing the solids concentration, so you're hauling less off the site. So option 1 would be to do and maintain the current operation, which has a lot of anticipated risk long-term, plus one of the DNR code requirements is they have 180 days of storage on site or show proof that you have a contract hauler for the next, I believe, 5 years. Option 2 would be what we would consider the standard amongst most treatment plants, is having enough storage on site. So that would involve constructing a new storage facility that would be 180 days storage. The existing tank would be reused for aerobic digestion so that you can get decanting, increase the solids concentration, ultimately lower the volume that you're hauling off site. So therefore your transportation costs would be lower and you'd have more flexibility in what time of year you're removing solids. And then we looked at a number of thickening or dewatering options. Option 3, 4, and 5 are all some sort of option that would significantly increase the solids concentration of the solids produced. And ultimately they worked out to be more cost long-term than option 2 or 1. So we down at the bottom here, the hauling cost per year for each of those options. The reason that they're lower as you get drier is because you're hauling off less material and you have more flexibility in how you haul it off the site. So in addition to process needs, there's a lot of deficiencies at the existing treatment plant location in terms of buildings and structures. So the service building, the electrical infrastructure and control system, and the administration building are all well beyond their design life expectancy. And we identified a lot of the structures in terms of needing repaired, both due to deteriorating conditions or just space use doesn't seem to be functional anymore for the utility staff. It's kind of hard to read up here, but this is kind of the differences in cost between the options that we had looked at. So I can just kind of point out here, we have the fine screening option, the raw wastewater pumping option. Really, there was only one alternative or option that we considered, just because they both need to be increased or replaced. There would be some flexibility in costs as we would need to design and bid this project out, depending on what vendor was actually selected. These are conservative numbers to kind of give you a budget estimate of what this whole plant upgrade would be. Great move, the same thing, just replace or refurbish, as I mentioned before, is only feasible option that we identified. It's when you get into these other process options that we have more than one alternative, and so cost between the two options is the deciding factor in which way we want to proceed. Here's the rest of the process units, so sludge processing and electrical controls, and then administrative and site service building. So the overall capital cost for the digester upgrade and storage tank option, which is option 2, and our solid option, that is the lowest capital cost option of the solids treatment options. So what are we recommending? If we look at all of these combined together, we've kind of broken it down into different sectors of the plants. We have operations controls, which would be general site service building upgrades, electrical service and controls, and then hydraulic capacity. These are issues that are currently seen and would be the same future projected flows and loads, how the plant would not be able to handle those and they need to be upgraded for capacity increases. And then we have biological process. This would be more of efficiency in terms of treatment and future loading conditions, which we need to do these types of upgrades. And then lastly, the solids option. So in total, the capital cost is roughly, this includes contingency engineering costs, roughly $25.5 million for all of those upgrades. So what does that mean in terms of what it looks like on the site and what type of upgrade we would be looking at? Kind of have a map here broken down color-wise of the different options and alternatives. So those purple units are kind of the new process areas and building structures that we would be upgrading. The blue areas over here would be the clarifiers. This is the aeration basin structure. The chemical treatments in yellow, and then the existing floor buildings here in blue and purple. Yes, if you go back here. And then this large shaded area you see here along this curve is plotted on here because that is actually where the floodplain passes through for the 100-year flood elevation. So some of the treatment plant does exhibit some flooding during that event, but since this structure is actually elevated above the ground there, you just see some backing up into disinfection, but not enough to cause any problems with flooding. So we'd have to be looking at any expansion on the site outside of that zone or area. So the planned upgrades would kind of look something like this. We've got a new admin building that would allow for not only a relocated staff into here for operations, but also have a maintenance garage area that is also potentially expandable for future other department additions onto this. So I think at one point, there's been some discussion of bringing the public, or the parks unit over here and combining some of that money in the funding pools to be able to have a larger building and shared space.
Are we allowed to ask a question now or at the end?
I would save questions to the end, because I'm going to go through everything here. The concept layout for that building, we've got laid or shown here. This is not the exact or final design. This would be something that would come up more so in a design contract or design engineering effort with the city. But the concept here is to have a flow through or drive through garage with parking stalls off that allow all the utility vehicles to be placed in here. And this drawing does not include any expansion to the parks department or any other departments. And then it has all the new office spaces, showers, lab, everything that would be required for the utility department to operate. And then also another concern with the utility was having secure access to the site. This allows public access outside of the gated area, which is this dark black line here, so that public can access one central door location while the rest of the plant is still secure with the site fence. So you may be asking, how would you be paying for this? There's funding available, as I mentioned, through the DNR's Clean Water Fund. The city is eligible to receive that funding. Most of the time, that's a 20-year loan, and that's approximately a 2.2% interest rate. The city would be eligible for up to 20% principal forgiveness. That's a combined between general principal forgiveness and then also some phosphorus related principal forgiveness. So the city could receive up to $3 million. That's capped by the Clean Water Fund program. And then the debt service loan would be repaid through sewer rate increases. We've got the current rate down here, which is listed at $29 per month for REU, and REU is a residential equivalency unit, so it's your approximate average family home. The increase of that monthly per residential home would go up to about $51 per month for that plant upgrade with principal forgiveness, and if you receive no principal forgiveness, it'd be about $56 a month. So that's a delta of about $22 increase per month for the principal forgiveness option, and then also a delta of about $27 per month for the no principal forgiveness option. That equates to about $153 per quarter, $168 per quarter, and about $612 per year, or $672 per year with principal forgiveness and without principal forgiveness. So what does that look like compared to other facilities or municipalities? Every year MSA, or every third year MSA produces this cost of clean report. We do a survey of a lot of municipalities in the state. Whatever we get back for information, we put together to kind of summarize treatment options and cost of treating wastewater across different sizes of municipalities. So what we do is we summarize that information in terms of populations. So this graph here you see on the wall is for municipalities between 5 and 10,000 residents. Naval falls right in that category of about 5,000. So here you're kind of seeing the larger municipalities. Your current average annual rate for residential equivalency unit or approximate normal residential house is about $348 a year, which is also 0.49% of your median household income. With the sewer upgrade and principal forgiveness, you would see that jump up to about $612 per year and roughly 1.2% of the median household income. So you kind of would be in the higher range of these 5,000 to 10,000 residential population municipalities. But if we look at some of the smaller communities, we kind of rate in the middle of the pack with the same numbers. So going from 348 up to 612. And what would be the proposed schedule for this? So we submitted this, or we will be submitting this facility plan to the DNR after we get comments, get back from this public hearing, so June 2023. From there, we would probably be looking at, the DNR needs 90 days to review and approve that facility plan, give us comments back if there are any questions or concerns. And then probably looking at the earliest, submitting plans and specifications after a design period of July 2024 to do the upgrade, and then submitting an application for funding to the DNR and Clean Water Fund program around September 2024, which would lead us to approved plans and specs for ready for bid in November 2024, and then potentially starting construction as early as January 2025. Since it's such a complicated and large facility, we anticipate roughly a 2-year timeframe for construction at the end of 2027, where construction will be complete. So with that, I can open it up for any questions people have for me, or if they want to do it on here. State the name.
I have a couple questions.
I think we should go up to the podium and state your name and address, just so that's on record with that.
Tom Jacquat, 414 Jansen. First question I have is, how is the median household income the data for that acquired? And, you're saying that, the percentages of where you're at currently, and then with the rate increase, it'll bring it up to a higher level of percentage. So where did the median household income data come from?
Yeah, that is actually published by the state, and I actually have the report in here in the facility plan. Yeah, actually, the name of the report there.
I think it's American Community Survey. It's a number that's provided to us. It's not something that we calculate. It's done every year, I think every year for every community, whether it be DOA or DNR. It's done every year. It's calculated. I'm not exactly sure how they calculate it, but that's what's kind of provided to us.
Okay, the next question is, based on the current location of the administrative building, for lack of a better term, where is the location of the new building in reference to that? And I had an opportunity to review part of the documentation, the PDF file, and you're saying modifications to the existing building would be 3.6 million, building a brand new one is 5.1. What's the real justification for that? I mean, you're talking about a $1.6 million difference. How do you expect the ratepayers to accept that when there's a less costly alternative?
So the numbers you were looking at were capital cost improvements. So this gray box is where the existing admin building sits. That building is from the early 1980s, and we did look thoroughly into keeping that building, rehabbing it, and trying to get the space utilization that the utility needs inside of that building. The space is kind of not as functional as a single-story building. It's a 2-story building with poor access in terms of future code compliant access for wheelchair or accessible or handicapped individuals. And then we looked at building a new building down here, which would house the new staff plus the garage. The option that considered just rehabbing this building, there was also a new garage down here because there's not enough garage space. So in the case of rehabbing this building, you end up with 2 separate buildings, a poor layout in terms of facility flow, and then you're maintaining this older structure, which has a lot of risk in terms of we don't know exactly what type of structural issues are underlying in this building if we start tearing it apart.
Wouldn't that have been due diligence for this report by doing that?
We did a walkthrough with our architectural staff. What we cannot do is core into the wall and see if there's cracked structural repairs, which would be found during a demolition process.
May I make a comment? Because I started off exactly where you're at. Why not rehab what we got? And
if we can find a way to do it that makes sense, I'd be all for it. What I kept thinking about is in 1984 when that was built.
Objection. This is a public hearing for the public, not for committee. I think the committee can weigh in afterwards, after the public gives their statement.
Am I not allowed to speak then? I think I'm allowed to make a comment. I'm not arguing, I'm just making a comment. And so what I was looking at was, in 1984, there was a lot of berm construction going on, and so that was what was being done at the time, along with passive solar. And I think, just where my head went, I think if they would have built a conventional building that was just on one level, I think we'd be in a pretty good position to rehab it and move forward with that. But I think you're asking a very fair question, and I think that needs to be run completely to the ground, and I think there's no unfair questions, and yeah.
Okay, and then, another question would be directed at MSA. Is there a set limit based upon the expected contract that MSA utilizes for, and a lack of a better term, their portion of the contract? Is it based on a one set fee, or is it based on the sliding scale for the bid after the bidding comes back for the contract?
No, we would, if you're just asking for a design contract for the facility engineering cost, that is usually set based on, in our fee would be based off of the hours we anticipate for the entire design. It would not be a fixed percentage of the planned project. Generally, that works out to be, in most cases, somewhere between 8 and 15% of the project. As you get smaller, that percentage goes up. As you get larger, that percentage generally comes down.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Jackie Langsdorf, excuse me, 135 Riverview Heights, Linville. I don't know that my questions are so much directed towards you as much as they are towards the rest of you for consideration. I guess in looking through the timeline that's proposed here, I'm wondering if, assuming that this all goes through, when would the rate increase take effect? Because it doesn't look like we're commencing construction until January 2025 based on this. Also, you're indicating that the low interest rate loan is currently at 2.178%, but you're not going to be submitting an application for that for over a year. So, is this a locked rate, or are we subject to that all of a sudden, as inflation keeps going or the recession, how much of a swing if we approve if something gets approved now, between now and when that application is made? What's the potential exposure there? The other thing is we're seeing a lot of numbers here as far as the impact on residential customers. How are commercial customers billed for this? And, I just don't understand how commercial customers are assessed their water bills, but how much of this burden are they going to be taking out? And at what percentage? And then the only other thing I would ask is that, it might be helpful, there's a lot of talk out there, people are talking all over social media about this stuff. It might be good if we could get some of this information posted out on the city website after tonight's meeting, just to quash any bad rumors going on. So that's all I have. Thank you.
I can comment on a couple of those things.
You probably know the best, yeah.
For assistance, so, sure. The rate increase would probably be around the commencement of the project based on when the loan would close. You're probably calculating what the rate increase had to be in place by that early 2025 point. The interest rate, you're right, is subject to change. That's why we have some that's part of why the contingency is in there to account for some of those interest rate changes. However, that interest rate the state buys it down, so it's 55% of whatever the market rate is. So any change in impact would not have as much impact, maybe you might think, because it's 55%. I think it's quarterly. Quarterly, that's updated. The DNR updates those interest rates. And the impact on commercial, that's the average user. There's different commercial rates. Obviously, Courtney would know what those are. And so it's based on the average residential user, so that's based on whatever their meter size is, right? And then whatever water they're using. So if somebody uses more water, they're gonna pay more. If somebody uses less water, they're gonna pay less. So it's kind of the average water user.
And the commercial rate is based the same as the residential
Yep,
rate.
on usage in equals usage out, so yeah,
Okay.
strictly on usage.
And at the same rate.
46 for domestic strength. Some industries we have that are based on strength, like based on laboratory testing as well, for different pollutants and things like that. They're assessed additional charges depending on strength.
Sure, okay, thank
All
you.
of that is subject to further rate study with the city to set rates for the future.
All right, Rob Bell, 235 North Clark Street, former mayor, first year Dodge County Board. I had a couple questions. You said that our flows exceed the limits of the plant currently. What are the flow rates? What are they?
I think specifically what we're talking about is the peak events.
Peak events.
All right, because I was concerned because we actually had MSA ran the plant for a while and our flow limits at that time were 650 to 700,000, which is about 72%. And we took on Kikoski Leroy, which increased it by another 5. So are we under the 80% threshold?
I think for the average flow, what you're talking about for that design, I think that's correct. It's these peak events when the peak flows come in is what Steve was referencing for what's being exceeded.
How many peak events do we have, in the average per year that we have to actually report to the DNR that we discharge in the river?
I don't know, sorry to put you on the spot, Courtney, I don't know if you know how many TFOs or SSOs you've reported.
Well, we've done some things operationally to try to reduce them at the plant or at least contain them to the treatment facility. But we were averaging probably 2 to 3 a year. Last year we had 1. We got it a little bit handled.
That's pretty
In
average.
overtime.
That's why we're on a lake or a river. That's why they put sewer plants there so we can discharge if we have.
I would say that it's against DNR regulation to have any TFOs or SSOs. They're good. Any submitted facility plan we submit, they're gonna wanna know how are you gonna eliminate that.
Okay, so can you tell me one municipality in Wisconsin that doesn't discharge in the river?
Many municipalities don't discharge into the river. Many that I've worked with.
Okay. And then, another question I have is that since this is gonna be an upgrade and we're gonna be doing some groundbreaking, that have to go to city council for approval, since the city owns the property?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Question for the mayor. I would think it would have to, since the city owns the property.
Do you consider that a problem?
I said, I don't think it's a problem. I'm just saying that it should go through the city council since they own the facility, or own the property.
All right, I just wasn't understanding what you're.
Right.
Thank you.
And the other question I have is that, did you take into consideration the design of leachate? I know the commission has approved over the last 3 years that they wanted to test leachate. And since at some point, I believe we will have to treat it at some point, are we actually doing an upgrade to look at treating leachate?
We considered leachate at the very beginning of the process, and through the discussion with the commission, was determined to not consider it any further.
Right, well, I think there's an opportunity, with the landfill to work out some long-term partnership, because they need the leachate treated. We haul 70 to 140,000 gallons of fond like every day. Why wouldn't we actually consider doing an upgrade, since the last 2 sewer directors said when we do an upgrade to the plant, we should be looking at treating leachate, because there's a cost-saving measures the taxpayers have made them. If we can work out a partnership that can come in different forms, you know, me and you went up to Berlin, we see how they did their leachate. I mean, they're treating less flows than we are. So I think,
Wasn't it determined, Bert, that it wasn't financially?
Well, the big thing I think with that is that they did so much pre-treatment there that by the time we got to the plant, it was.
right, which could all be determined on some kind of
So
an agreement plan, for each of the
it comes at a reduced rate when the pretreatment's necessary because you're treating less contaminants. So the pay arrangement would be less for taking in that. And the municipalities that are taking leachate right now are Fond du Lac, West Bend, and 30,000 plus
Right.
populations with buffering
It could
capacities.
be an opportunity for them to pay for half our plant up front in exchange. It all depends on how you want to work the agreement.
We did the financial studies and a reduced rate for any sort of pretreatment wouldn't justify adding. There's been, I think, one study by the Strand, and you guys looked into it. We did look into it as well.
So I can add one or two comments on it. I think we identified that there's a very high fluoride concentration in the leachate, which isn't something you can really treat for or remove. So we'd be looking at essentially exceeding in your fluoride discharge limits and not being able to get rid of it.
Under compliance.
Then concern with some of the metals concentrations that we found in biosalts, making it potentially unable to be identified. Any other questions or comments?
So where do we go from here? So the plan gets submitted just like his time schedule, correct?
Correct.
That's one thing I'll check into is, I tell you the truth, I don't know. I would imagine the council's got to approve it. I think so. But I don't know, to tell you the truth, I don't.
Well, we're gonna run that to the ground and easily enough.
Yeah.
By the 30, so I got 30.
Any other comments? If not, we'll conclude this public hearing, and if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to get a hold of Courtney at the office, or she can always pass them along to MSA, or you can get a hold of MSA directly.
Yeah, we can share the, PDF version of the plan, and I think Steve
That's a
sent
good
the slides as well. The slides
Yeah,
you had in there, I think, right?
The plant can also be toured, right, for people if they.
Yeah, that's one thing, if anyone's interested, I put together, a tour date to show some of the operational and maintenance issues, I guess, too. So, I imagine that would be more of a evening tour or something like that, but
Why don't you set up a date?
yeah, and
for
it's
that? There'll be a
definitely, I
couple
wanted to
dates,
make sure there's interest in that before I just scheduled something and
I think if anybody has any questions, that'd be the best way to go down there and walk
it's
through it.
visual, yeah.
That's really,
You know, but you have to call to get in because the security gate's been closed for the last several weeks.
well, that's what she said. She set a date that she'd have
Yeah,
that
the gate
open.
closes at 2:00.
I drove by early afternoon between 1 and 1:30, and that gate is closed several times.
Yeah, I don't know, program to go at 2, so I'm not sure. But yeah, if we wanna call, set something up, I'd be happy to set up a time and schedule, or I can set up a bulk day where we can run through with everybody.
Yes, I just have one question. This is real quick. The plan that you're gonna submit to the DNR is your recommendations?
Correct.
And that was the 25 million plus the building?
Includes
Includes the building?
You don't have a floor now.
No, right? So I can, what's the best, I don't know how many people check the city website, but informational city Facebook page for most, yeah.
I think set up a couple dates and
That's cool.
see who shows up.
Yeah, you know, it would have been helpful, like before tonight's meeting, if this would have been posted where you would normally post the agenda on the
Okay.
city page. Yeah, because that's where I went to look to pull up the meeting notice and
Informational?
that,
Okay.
so that would have been helpful and
Okay.
Something in the paper too to reference.
Yeah, we did have the plan available, but if we could find that PDF, I couldn't get close to that.
Yeah, it still says we're accepting comments up through June 20th.
Okay. All right, so anything received. All right.
Very good. Thank you all for showing up. Appreciate it.
Thank you.